US President Joe Biden's administration has announced a set of measures to counter the rising violence against the Asian American community. The White House has allocated $49.5 million from COVID-19 Relief Fund for community programs to help the victims. This will include community-based, culturally specific services, programs for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. It will also be used to form a new task force dedicated to countering xenophobia against Asians in the healthcare sector. The Justice Department has said that it is planning new efforts to enforce hate crime laws and report data on racial crimes. Officials also said that the Department of Justice is focusing on a rising number of hate crimes against Asian Americans. President Biden took to Twitter and said, "We can't be silent in the face of rising violence against Asian Americans. That's why today I am taking additional steps to respond, including establishing an initiative at the Department of Justice to address anti-Asian crimes." He added, "These attacks are wrong, un-American and must stop." US Vice President Kamala Harris also said, "A harm against any one of us is a harm against all of us. President of the United States and I will not be silent, which is why our administration is taking steps to address the rise in violence against the Asian American community, including an initiative to combat anti-Asian violence." Remember, the United States has witnessed a rise in violence against Asian Americans. According to data compiled by the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States, more than 3,700 incidents were reported from March 19, 2020 to February 28, 2021. That's more than 3,000 cases. The reported cases present only a fraction of the number of actual hate crimes that take place. 68.1% of incidents relate to verbal harassment, 20.5% cases people were shunned or deliberately avoided. Physical assault cases comprise 11.1%, 8.5% cases include civil rights violations, and this includes workplace discrimination, refusal of service, and being barred from transportation. 6.8% of total incidents of online harassment were also reported. Asian Americans living in California, New York, Washington, Texas, and Pennsylvania face the most number of crimes. More than 1,600 crimes have been reported in California, 517 in New York, 159 in Washington, more than 100 in Texas, and 97 in Pennsylvania. Recently, 8 people were killed in a Georgia shooting incident. 6 out of the 8 victims were of Asian descent. The authorities fell short of calling the attack a hate crime. The incident, however, angered the Asian American community who protested against the course of the investigation. Joining us on this broadcast now is WION correspondent Jagruti Dave, who is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Jagruti, more than 3,000 cases of hate against Asian Americans over the last year, and the steps taken by the president just shows how seriously his administration is taking this issue.
Yes, I think what the attack in the Atlanta area showed was the real sense of, and the aftermath with the protests against anti-American Asian violence against the Asian American community. It showed the real concerns in the community, but also now outside of the community, about the rise in the violent incidents against Asian Americans. You mentioned some statistics there. I mean, we're hearing some really truly awful reports of physical attacks on elderly people of Asian descent in America, as well as a whole range of other groupings, other age groups, but I think what a lot of Asian Americans are saying is that this isn't new. This has been happening.
This is the incident that Jagruti was talking about. This is an attack that happened in New York, and on your screens are disturbing visuals. We urge caution. Now, this is an incident that happened in New York, and New York police is on the lookout for an attacker who repeatedly kicked and punched a 65-year-old Asian American woman. And these are disturbing visuals, and this is what the Asian American community has been facing in the recent past. And President Joe Biden has now taken steps to address the issue. Jagruti, you were elaborating how elderly Asian Americans in America have faced incidents of violence recently.
Yes, and I think this is just one of many incidents that we have been hearing about here in the United States and across the world, that this is being reported. So the White House issued a statement saying that across our nation, an outpouring of grief and outrage continues at the horrific violence and xenophobia perpetrated against Asian American communities, especially Asian American women and girls. Now, I think there are many people who are arguing that many of the attacks on both verbal and physical attacks on Asian Americans is tied to the pandemic and the rhetoric surrounding the pandemic. For example, the coronavirus being called the China virus, most notably by the former US president. Now, of course, there are many people who will also say that is free speech, that you can't tie people using phrases such as the China virus directly to attacks on Asian Americans. But many people will argue that that kind of language fosters the environment of xenophobia, or that right. kind of environment that has led to the sharp rise in attacks on Asian Americans.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.